What's up, frickin' weirdos? My name is Kevin, and I'm the host of Where the Weird Ones Are podcast. This is a conversational podcast based on guest experiences and encounters with paranormal, cryptids, aliens, spirituality, mental health, as well as conspiracies. If these topics interest you, you can find me on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, as well as YouTube and Rumble. If you have an encounter or an experience of something that you can't quite explain, I would love to hear from you. You can reach out to me at wheretheweirdonesare@gmail.com, where_the_weirdonesare on Instagram, and Where the Weird Ones Are on Facebook. I hope to hear from you, my friends. Question everything and stay weird.
Welcome to the D.E.A.D podcast, where I discuss all things spooky and weird. I am Desi, and today I'll be talking about The Crow. Let's get started. Hey everyone, how's everyone doing tonight? I hope y'all are doing good. Tonight I decided to make something a little different tonight. I am drinking a Coke float. I don't like root beer, so it's not a root beer float, with the vanilla ice cream and a Coke in my cute glass, and I will post a picture of that. It's really good. Tonight I am wearing my shirt. I didn't have a t-shirt for The Crow tonight. I wish I would have gotten one. But I am wearing my t-shirt that has like the spooky background woven into the skull outline. So it has like the creepy trees, it has the tombstone with the cemetery, and it has bats, and it has a crow on it. So I thought that was perfect for the episode tonight about The Crow. So this was my first time watching this film. I had never heard of it or watched it before, why it never came up, but I saw a lot of people on Instagram talking about the remake, and so people were upset about it being remade, but I didn't even understand like why or even what the movie was. So one night I was watching like an older horror movie that I had never seen before. And like at the bottom where it says it will suggest other movies to you? Well, this was one of them. So I decided to give it a shot. So I had fun going down this rabbit hole and learning all this. Also, it is being released the night of the 13th. Technically, it'll be the 14th, but it's being released the night of the 13th because that is the anniversary of the movie being released. The movie was released on May 13th, 1994. So I'm releasing this episode 30 years later on the anniversary of the movie. Let's get started. So I'm going to be talking about Brandon Lee's life, a little bit about his dad, the movie, what happened on the set of the movie, and some theories behind his death. So that's how the episode's going to go. So first, Brandon Lee's life. Brandon Bruce Lee was born on February 1st, 1965, at East Oakland Hospital in Oakland, California, the son of martial artist and actor Bruce Lee and Linda Lee Cadwell. From a young age, Lee learned martial arts from his father, who was a well-known practitioner and a martial arts movie star. The family lived between Hong Kong and the United States, due to his father's career. While visiting his father on set, Lee became interested in acting. Lee's father died suddenly in 1973 when Brandon was 8 years old, leaving a legacy that made him an icon of martial arts and cinema. Afterwards, Lee's family moved back to California. Lee began studying with Dan Inosanto, one of his father's students, when he was only 9 years old. Lee was a rebellious high school student. In 1983, 4 months before graduation, Lee was asked to leave the Chadwick School for misbehavior. Lee studied acting at Emerson College. He started his career with leading roles in the Hong Kong action film Legacy of Rage in 1986, for which he was nominated for a Hong Kong Film Award for Best New Performer and the straight-to-video Laser Mission in 1989, which was a financial success on home video. Lee also appeared on 2 spin-offs of the 1970 series Kung Fu, the TV film, Kung Fu, the movie in 1986, and the pilot Kung Fu, the Next Generation in 1987. In 1988, Lee played an antagonist in What's in a Name, an episode of the American TV series O'Hara, starring Pat Morita. Transitioning to Hollywood productions, Lee first starred in the Warner Brothers buddy cop film Showdown in Little Tokyo in 1991, co-starring Dolph Lundgren. This was followed by a leading role in Rapid Fire in 1992. He landed his breakthrough role as Eric Draven in the supernatural superhero film The Crow in 1994. However, Lee's character and life were cut short by his accidental death during the film's production. After being cast to headline The Crow, Lee had filmed nearly all of his scenes when he was fatally wounded on set by a prop gun. Lee posthumously received praise for his performance. While the film became a critical and commercial success, his career has drawn parallels with his father's, both men having died young prior to the release of their breakthrough films. The movie The Crow is a 1994 American superhero film directed by Alex Proyas and written by David J. Chow and John Shirley, based on the 1989 comic book series by James O'Barr. Brandon Lee was fatally wounded by a prop gun during filming. As he had finished most of his scenes, the film was completed through script rewrites, a stunt double, and digital effects. After Lee's death, Paramount Pictures opted out of distribution, and the rights were acquired by Miramax Films. The film is dedicated to Lee and his fiancée, Eliza Hutton. The Crow was released in the United States on May 13, 1994, and received positive reviews. It grossed $94 million on a $23 million budget and has gained a cult following. The plot: on Devil's Night, in a crime-ravaged and decrepit Detroit, Michigan, a young woman, Shelley Webster, is raped and seriously wounded, while her rock musician fiancé, Eric Draven, is shot and thrown to his death from the window of their loft apartment. Police Sergeant Daryl Albrecht accompanies Shelley to the hospital, but she eventually dies from her injuries. A narration states, "The legend of a crow that carries souls to the land of the dead." But if the person died in tragic circumstances, the crow can resurrect the restless spirit to set things right. 1 year later, Shelley's and Eric's graves are visited by Sarah, a young girl the pair cared for due to her absent mother. A crow lands on Eric's gravestone and taps on it, resurrecting him. Disoriented and distressed, Eric returns to his ravaged loft apartment and experiences flashbacks of the murders. A gang of men, Tintin, Funboy, T-Bird, and Skank, targeted the pair because they were protesting forced evictions in their apartment building, which the gang's leader, ruthless crime boss Top Dollar, intended to seize. Realizing that any injuries he suffers are immediately healed, Eric dons black and white face paint and sets out to avenge himself and Shelley, guided by the Crow. The Crow leads Eric to Tintin, whom Eric stabs to death. He next travels to the pawn shop where Tintin had pawned Shelley's engagement ring. Eric recovers the ring and blows up the shop, but spares the owner Gideon so he can alert Top Dollar's men that Eric is coming for them. Albrecht begins investigating the apparent vigilante disturbances, while Eric finds Funboy taking drugs with Sarah's estranged drug addict mother, Darla. He gives Funboy a fatal overdose and purges the drugs from Darla's body, telling her that Sarah needs her. Eric visits Albrecht and confirms his suspicions regarding the vigilante's identity. Albrecht tells Eric that he stayed with Shelley until she died, witnessing the 30 hours of suffering she experienced. Eric touches Albrecht, absorbing the pain Shelley felt. Later, Eric saves Sarah from being hit by a car, revealing to her that he has returned. Eric next targets T-Bird, killing him in an explosion. The following morning, Sarah and Darla reconcile, and Sarah reunites with Eric at his apartment. Top Dollar holds a meeting with his associates to discuss his plans to burn the city to the ground on Devil's Night. Eric arrives for Skank, but a gunfight erupts, ending with Eric throwing Skank from a window to his death. Top Dollar, his lover and half-sister Micah, and his right-hand man Grange escape. Micah correctly hypothesizes that the Crow is the source of Eric's immortality. Satisfied with his vengeance, Eric gifts Shelley's engagement ring to Sarah and returns to his grave. Grange abducts Sarah as she is walking home and takes her to an abandoned church with Micah and Top Dollar, who takes Shelley's ring. Eric is alerted to her plight by the Crow and rushes to rescue her, but he is ambushed by Grange, who wounds the Crow, rendering Eric vulnerable. Albrecht arrives and kills Grange, while Micah attempts to take the Crow for its immortality. It claws her eyes out, causing her to fall to her death from the bell tower. Top Dollar retreats to the church roof with Sarah, where he fights and badly wounds Eric. Eric transfers Shelley's pain into Top Dollar, causing him to stumble off the roof and be impaled on a gargoyle, killing him. Sarah and a wounded Albrecht are recovered from the church, while a pained Eric goes to Shelley's grave, where her spirit arrives to comfort him and return his body to rest. Sometime later, Sarah visits the graves, and the Crow returns Shelley's ring to her. What happened on set? On March 31st, 1993, Lee was filming a scene for the film The Crow, in which his character is shot and killed by thugs. In the scene, Lee's character walks into his apartment and discovers his fiancée being beaten and raped, and a thug played by actor Michael Massey fires a Smith & Wesson model 629 44 Magnum revolver at Lee's character as he walks into the room. In a film shoot prior to the fatal scene, the gun that was used as a prop, a real revolver, was loaded with improperly made dummy rounds, improvised from live cartridges that had the powder charges removed by the special effects crew. So, in close-ups, the revolver would show normal-looking ammunition. However, the crew neglected to remove the primers from the cartridges. And at some point before the fatal event, one of the rounds had been fired. Although there were no powder charges, the energy from the ignited primer was enough to separate the bullet from the casing and push it part way into the gun barrel, where it got stuck, a dangerous condition known as a squib load. During the fatal scene, which called for the revolver to be fired at Lee from a distance of about 3.6 to 4.5 meters, or 12 to 15 feet, the dummy cartridges were replaced with blank rounds, which contained a powder charge and the primer, but no solid bullet, allowing the gun to be fired with sound and flash effects without the risk of an actual projectile. However, the gun was not properly checked and cleared before the blank was fired, and the dummy bullet previously lodged in the barrel was then propelled forward by the blank's propellant and shot out the muzzle with almost the same force as if the round were live, striking Lee in the abdomen. After Massey pulled the trigger and shot Lee, Lee fell backwards instead of forwards as he was supposed to. When the director said, "Cut," Lee did not stand up, and the crew thought he was either still acting or joking. Jeff Imada, who immediately checked Lee, noticed something wrong when he came close and noted Lee was unconscious and breathing heavily. Medic Clyde Basie went to Lee and shook him to see if he was dazed by hitting his head during the fall, but did not think Lee had been shot since there was no visible bleeding. Basie took Lee's pulse, which was regular, but within 2 to 3 minutes it slowed down dramatically and then stopped. Lee was rushed to the New Hanover Regional Medical Center in Wilmington, North Carolina. Attempts to save him were unsuccessful, and after 6 hours of emergency surgery, Lee was pronounced dead on March 31st, 1993, at 1:03 p.m. He was 28 years old. The shooting was ruled an accident due to negligence. After this tragedy, they originally decided to not film any further without Brandon because they could not even fathom continuing without him. But after Brandon's fiancée, Eliza, and his mother said that Brandon was incredibly proud of this film, and if they were able to, he would want them to continue. Several of the crew did not want to come back either, but they did come back to make sure that this film got seen by everyone for Brandon. They decided to use a stunt double for the rest of the scenes, but they wanted to create a mask with Brandon's face on it so the stunt double could wear it in the film. That was extremely hard on the crew. Whenever the stunt double wore that mask, it freaked out the whole film crew. There were changes they had to make. Instead of doing a lot of one-on-one dialogue scenes between Eric Draven and his girlfriend, they had to make a lot of montages. Also, a lot was shot in shadow. They had to take out the Skull Cowboy character. They had shot just one setup shot with him and Brandon Lee at the beginning of production. They were going to fly him back in at the end. They never ended up doing that. They had to write around the mention of that character. Lee's death led to the re-emergence of conspiracy theories surrounding his father's similarly early death. Lee was buried next to his father at the Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle, Washington. A private funeral attended by 50 people took place in Seattle on April 3rd. The following day, 200 of Lee's family and business associates attended a memorial service at actress Polly Bergen's house in Los Angeles. Among the attendees were Kiefer Sutherland, Lou Diamond Phillips, David Hasselhoff, Steven Seagal, David Carradine, and Melissa Etheridge. In August 1993, Lee's mother, Linda Lee Cadwell, filed a lawsuit against the filmmakers alleging negligence in the death of her son. The suit was settled 2 months later under undisclosed terms. In an interview just prior to his death, Lee quoted a passage from Paul Bowles' book, The Sheltering Sky, which he had chosen for his wedding invitations. It is now inscribed on his tombstone. Quote, "Because we don't know when we will die, we get to think of life as an inexhaustible well, and yet everything happens only a certain number of times, and a very small number really. How many more times will you remember a certain afternoon of your childhood, an afternoon that is so deeply a part of your being that you can't even conceive of your life without it? Perhaps 4 or 5 times more? Perhaps not even that. How many more times will you watch the full moon rise? Perhaps 20? And yet, it all seems limitless." End quote. Now I'll be going over some alleged theories about Brandon's death and also some that tie back to his dad. When pre-production offices were set up, they received a voicemail that said, quote, "Don't make this movie, bad things will happen," end quote. The Crow was rumored to be cursed due to how many accidents took place during the filming process. On the very first day of filming, 2 electricians had a terrible accident. They only shot at night, so it was at night and they were driving a truck with a cherry picker, and they backed the cherry picker up into a high-tension electric wire and it caught on fire. The electrician was rushed to the hospital with 2nd and 3rd degree burns all over his body, and he lost both his ears. Later, a construction worker accidentally drove a screwdriver through his hand, and a disgruntled sculptor crashed his car through the studio's backlot. And they also went through the storm of the century, a terrible hurricane that destroyed backlot sets. What was going on was called the Curse of the Crow. Someone also made an ill-timed comment that things have happened, but, quote, "it's not like someone has died," end quote. Now, it also could have been a continuation of the curse of Bruce Lee, who died under suspicious circumstances while shooting a film. There are theories that there was a hit on him from the Chinese mafia for betraying martial arts secrets. One of the interesting fantasy theories was that Bruce Lee was struck by a death blow, which is a specific type of strike, which its impact does not take effect until days, weeks, months, or even years later. There is another theory that his passing was part of the Lee family curse. Bruce Lee's parents lost their first male son. This was attributed to the belief that there was a curse or a demon after the males in the Lee family. He was sometimes dressed in female's clothing or referred to as a female name in order to deflect and break the curse on the males in the family. The actual circumstances around Bruce Lee's death are much less sinister. Now, yes, he was found at the apartment of a young starlet who he may or may not have been having an affair with. While at this apartment, he took a painkiller and took a nap and did not wake up. They attributed his death to having a hypersensitivity to this particular painkiller. There was an autobiography put out called Bruce Lee, A Life by Matthew Polly, and he puts a theory out there that it was a heat stroke that killed him. Leading up to the last year of his death, Bruce Lee had his sweat glands removed because he wanted to look good on screen. A month or so before he passed, he actually had a seizure and a stroke, and this could very well be the result of a misdiagnosed heat stroke. Game of Death is Bruce Lee's final film, and he does not live to finish it. And that is already a weird parallel with what happened to Brandon in The Crow. It gets even weirder when you consider that Bruce Lee's character is shot on the set of the film in The Game of Death, which is exactly how his son dies in 1993. Okay, so my thoughts on this movie. One, I loved the movie. I love the darkness of it. I love the cast, everything. It was very good. Of course, it is a 90s movie, but it was good. I wasn't sure what to expect going in, but I thoroughly enjoyed it a lot, especially the revenge part. The tragedy behind it makes it even more intense, a lot like The Dark Knight with Heath Ledger for me, even though that was before that time, but it has that same darkness about it. Although I did not know about Brandon Lee and the tragedy until after I watched the movie, which kind of made it even sadder. But I thought he was very talented, and I wish I could have seen him in more stuff. It makes the whole thing very eerie with his dad passing and then him passing too. Obviously, they didn't die the same way, but an eerily similar general situation with the movies being filmed at the same time as they passed, and then the manner in which his dad dies in the movie is how his son Brandon actually dies in real life. I don't know if it was a coincidence or not, them both dying the way they did, but it is definitely spooky in my eyes. Let me know what y'all's theories are, and let me know what y'all think about him and his dad's death, or just his death. And if you've seen this movie, and if y'all are going to go see The New Crow when that comes out. Let me know. That brings me to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening to the D.E.A.D podcast. Please follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at the D.E.A.D podcast. Also, feel free to send in your stories, episode suggestions, or feedback at the deadpodcast1@gmail.com, or send me a DM on Instagram. If you enjoyed this show, please rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on, and be sure to come back next week for my next episode.